So like you were talking about, you have our ICS certification. We also do certifications for like red team, blue team, forensics, a whole bunch of things. We do actually have some leadership. We also have a series of free resources. Just this week, we actually hosted a Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit, free virtually. We have ones coming up here on ransomware. We do a hacker one. There's a whole bunch of things every single day. And we also maintain the Internet Storm Center. So think about it as kind of like the news of the day. So it's maintained by 5,000 plus people that actually maintain networks. So whenever there's a virus, something that's happened in the community. So when you get your patch on Tuesday from Microsoft, Microsoft actually has a full-time staff that just watches that Internet Storm Center. So think of it as kind of like the news in cybersecurity. And so we're going to go ahead and start here in a little bit. So Tara actually is going to be talking about the background of 8140. I'm going to be talking about the implementation. We'd love for you to ask questions once we're done. Hopefully we start answering a lot of your questions. And then, I was going to let you know, just as a little funny joke. So as I was coming over here to San Diego on my flight, I actually was sitting down, and the individual next to me was a flight attendant for United Airlines. I actually come from a whole family of airline employees myself. I'm actually considered the black sheep of the family as the non-airline employee. So I started talking about airlines and this and that because I've lived it my whole life. And about halfway through the flight, the guy asked me, he said, "So what do you do for a living?" I said, "Oh, I'm in cybersecurity. I've been doing this now for about 25 years. And nobody knew what it was. Back then it was called information security, information assurance. I don't know if we even had a name back then. We just created it. Tara, you were around there too. So I've actually known Tara longer than I've known most SANS employees. So we've been friends for actually a long time. But as I'm sitting there, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, I'm going through school in cybersecurity." He goes, "Isn't that the coolest industry ever?" And he said, "Well, what do you do in cybersecurity?" And I said, "Well, I'm a little bit more on the business side of things, but I do know the techies, I know the hackers and all that good stuff." And I said, "I work for the certifications that put those together and then the training." And the guy turned to me and said, "Do you work for CompTIA?" So, so I got it deflated a little bit because sometimes people do say, "Wow, you work for SANS." But in this case, he's like, "I never heard of you." So, it's something that was a little funny. And I did say, "Well, I'm doing a presentation actually 2 days from now with CompTIA." And he's like, "Wow." He's like, "What are those people like?" So now you actually get to meet one of them, which is Tara. So no pressure. So if you want to give it up for Tara.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Oh, can you hear me? Okay, I got the yes from the back of the room. I'm Tara Dean, CompTIA. I've been with CompTIA for 25 years. I really was 12 when I started, plus a couple of years. But I have worked my way into the government space and kind of supporting the government space when the ink was barely dry on 8570, which some of you in here might be familiar with what that was, or even might still be wondering, what am I supposed to do? Because I have a contract that talks about it, and I'm being told it's not around. So we're going to kind of delve into, well, why did we make some changes? What brought this about? And then I'm going to let Brian do the heavier uplift of, now how do you take it from where we are today and run with it? It's this.
Yep.
All right. Oh, there's a little bit about me. So I did actually in my career at CompTIA work on some early skill standardization. I'm getting yelled at. Sorry. I did do some early framework before there was such a thing as like a DCWF or a NICE framework, if you've heard of that. And so I did some of those first projects, and I continue to work on all of the work that CompTIA does with our mapping to all of the frameworks out there. Let's do this. So why did we actually make the change from 8570 to 8140? That's kind of going to be the first thing we talk about, and then we're going to do just a quick overview of what is 8140. All right, so it's ancient history. 8570's gone. It's dead. There are still contracts that reference it. We know that. And they're in this wonky transition stage. There are updates coming to the DFARS. There are contracts now that are actually starting to put them in there, even though the DFARS are not. So you're going to, if you haven't heard about it yet, hear about it soon if you're a contractor in the room. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, how many folks in here are contractor? Okay. And then everybody else civilian or uniform military. Okay, so it looks like about 2/3 civilian and military, 1/3 contractor. That's great to know. So 8570 really just focused on information security only. It was a very narrow set of jobs that you did in the military. The leveling was not based on skills within it. It was really narrow. It didn't encompass really all of what cyber is. And then tracking the workers. There wasn't a thoughtful way in which they were going to do that was able to truly get the data that helps drive things like budget and support and adoption. And really, the emphasis wasn't on the practical skills. So what are you doing in your job, and what knowledge, skills, abilities do you need to have to actually be able to perform in that role? So that's kind of why 8570 didn't work. I got the nod over there. Yeah, there were some things that people probably thought like, oh, it became a check the box, right? How many of you were like, oh, great, I got that certification. I was told to do it. Wasn't the one that I really wanted, but that's the one they told me to get. Maybe I struggled really hard to get it because it's really not what I do in my job. I've had plenty of those conversations of somebody whose job wasn't anything to do with, but they were told, you're an IAT2, go get that Security Plus. Or better yet, you're an 18-year-old with no experience, go get your CISSP or a SANS certification. How impossible of a task for them. And really, it did no benefit for anyone with that. So this was kind of the chart. I don't know why I have two of them in here, but it kind of talks to, I guess, what CompTIA had in there. We're going to just skip on. So really, 8570 was super narrow, but there's a lot that's been changing in government. There's new opportunities. There's a lot of things coming out from White House, previous administration, and more to come, I'm sure, with the latest. Everything around improving our nation's cybersecurity. So zero trust, artificial intelligence, the 5 data decrees, the skills-based hiring approach from the White House. All of those things have been what now has to be part of the mission within the Department of Defense. Those are what is driving how do we do the skills-based approach and management of our workforce. And really, again, how do we go back to these powers that be and report that we're doing what you're asking us to do? Because that's kind of the key in this, is having a thoughtful approach that really does validate or arm the entire workforce with the appropriate skills to do the job, and then be able to get that data, report it back, to get the budgets to help keep this cycle going so that more improvement can happen. Everybody can get armed with the latest kind of training that they need. So the big focus is on the knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks now. It's not just this kind of arbitrary baseline of certification with this very narrow focused job set. So really there's 3 dimensions if we look at kind of how cybersecurity is. There's the actual information, keeping it secure. There's the physical part of it, which is the machines, the equipment, the facilities. And then there's the human part of that. And really what we're trying to touch on with all of this is understanding what is that perspective of cybersecurity and what is the appropriate kinds of things. So you'll see in a lot of the, at least I know in our certifications, there are components that will talk about the information part, the physical part, and then the human part, which probably is what in most of our studies still is kind of that vulnerable part. People don't necessarily understand that they're being victims We hear it from elderly all the time. I didn't know I shouldn't have done that. But more so even in an organization, I didn't realize sending that attachment of something was not the right thing to do. We have 5 domains kind of what is the cyberspace, cybersecurity. It's space, air, sea, and land, and kind of like the amount of cyber in that world of, so this is nothing that should be new to you, but it's the steps into making sure that we're encompassing all of that cyberspace with the new 8140, and everybody that's working in and performing their jobs in those spaces. So the backbone of 8140 and the transition kind of out of that whole IAT, IAM, IASAE, and all the acronyms that were 8570 was really the Defense Cybersecurity Workforce Framework, DCWF. And you can go, this is the DoD Cyber Exchange. This should be bookmarked. If you are a supervisor that has to do things, if you are an individual that's wondering, how do I qualify? If you're a contractor that's going, I'm going to have to navigate this, and we're just trying to work that out, this is your place to go for all of the official documentation. So out on the DoD Cyber Exchange is the actual interactive framework that you can go in and you can say, I'm in this workforce element, this work role, and you can see all of the KSATs for that role. And then they also have in there the document library, which is where you'll find the qualification matrices. Those are always changing and updating, so just know that what you see this week might be different next week. They are dated, so thankfully you can see when was the last one released, but as new options are being approved to qualify and being validated and put through the processes set forth, the matrices have to update to reflect that. And so that is why they are constantly changing. There is a close relationship between the DoD CIO, the WIT office, and everyone with all of the vendors. And it is the certification bodies, the training organizations that are doing certificate programs and training, the universities and degree, so those accredited degrees that will qualify. So there are multiple ways in which you can now meet your requirement for your work role. They are also expanding it not just to what that narrow focus was, but it is now going to include not just IT, but data and AI and coding, the enablers out there. So there's a lot broader audience, which is going to require a lot more innovative ways in which to meet those requirements, because I can tell you there's not certifications for all of the work roles out there, and there probably won't be, but there could be college degrees or some training, specialized training. We are trying really hard. SANS is really trying hard this year. But when it makes sense, there's a certification, and it makes sense for us to do that, or SANS or ISC2, any of the vendors out there. They certainly are evaluating when it makes sense, and we have each probably our own criteria of what exactly that means. The actual DCWF was kind of drawn, so the job roles kind of, NICE had their framework. Defense needed it to have the defense roles in it too, and they actually delved a little deeper. So there are nuances and difference between that NICE framework and DCWF. I think for in the purposes of this room, you guys are worried about DCWF. And then, everything now, 8570 was kind of static. It kind of got put out there, and there was only a couple of edits to it, the way it was published. This will get reassessed regularly and be updating. The framework will be looked at on a regular basis. Have the work roles changed and evolved? That was some of the things that were lacking out of that 8570, that directive. That is definitely part of 8140. But there has been, there's crosswalks out there between kind of 8570 to 8140 in some of those work roles. Yes, sir. Is there, so the question is there a document, there isn't a microphone there, but I'll repeat it this time. Is there a document that basically states 8570 is deprecated and gone? Yes, if you're actually out there, there are under the documents library, or it might be actually under the, when you go to the home page, they give you all of the policies, and the first document is basically saying this is replacing 8570, the end. That's the one that overwrites it. The DFARs do not say or reference 8140 yet. That is in the works and has been, and you're starting to see at least contract officers putting reference to it while we're all waiting. Recent administration changes are probably going to slow that process down. But there is on this cyber exchange the policy, which I think is just 8140.01 is the first document, and that's the one that tells you this is replacing 8570. Ooh, I pulled that one out. So when you're looking at a work role, and I have here, hopefully it's visible well enough for you. This is kind of an example of what a work role tells you, an overview of it. This actually is out of what NICE did, but then when we come in, oh, this is just one of the pairings documents. I don't want to talk about that. So we're going to keep talking 8140 because that makes better sense. So 8140, so we're upskilling all active duty personnel contractors performing IT functions. That is one of the main goals of it. They're looking to be hands-on and practical. People do work. They are hands-on. They need to be able to do that. Newly changed, it was 72 work roles. There is a new work role. We will unveil it later in the presentation. I'll let Brian.
We have a current and all.
Yes, we have the coming out on the DCWF framework document soon, the 73rd work role. So there are now 73 of them. So, and then the ways in which you can comply with the foundational. So there is foundational, residential, qualifications, and then continuing ed. Those are kind of the three big buckets. Right now, everybody's focused on the foundational requirements. Year one, everybody should be under cybersecurity element. If you were in that, something's being reported on you right now. Whether or not you meet it or not will remain to be seen. It's all being done. So there are 3 different ways foundational qualifications can be met as a primary way. It is a certification that has been deemed to qualify for that work role at that proficiency level. The certifications must have ISO 17024, which is the same ISO that we had to have when we were part of 8570, so nothing about that changed. The universities must have a regional accreditation, so if you're looking at degrees, that's a regional accreditation, and it must have been earned in the last 5 years. So they are, there's work happening with universities on getting all of that. There have been some exceptions. There is internal schoolhouse training from all the various internal training within the mostly uniform services right now, predominantly, that have been evaluated. They don't have an outside like ISO requirement or accreditation, but those have been reviewed and are listed as well for the work roles in which they map. So there is, and then there is training. So there is, and I kind of glossed over that, and I didn't mean to. So there's the certification, 17024, or there is a certificate training program. A training program would have to have ISO 2659. So the big difference is a certification exam with 17024 does a job task analysis. It validates a work role. There's job skills that are being validated through the exam. A certificate 2659 kind of training program validates you learned in that training course. And there is an assessment still at the end. It's got rigor to it. It's just a different mindset, but it's still mapped with what you're learning to the KSATs of a work role. And then, like I said, the university programs, the degrees are being mapped as well. I'm throwing it out there. I'm the cert provider. Certifications are portable. And they build in continuing ed, which is a requirement. So I'm always going to push for certification where there's a certification listed, but by all means, we embrace our universities, especially the ones that clearly are embracing CompTIA. And we do a lot of work with the universities to embed our certifications so that there is that hands-on validation component as part of that certification program, and of course, certificate programs. So this is where I was just talking. There's that foundational requirement and the qualification. It is an or. You don't have to have a cert and a degree. It is literally an or. Commercial training or DoD military training or a degree or a certification. You can see this is the example of what it would look like for the 511 cyber defense analyst. So there is a BS degree in information at a basic level. You can do that. You can take some of the internal military training. We don't have currently, at the time I pulled this, which was last week, there wasn't commercial training yet. They're still evaluating. A lot of that's just going to start rolling out now because they were getting their 2659 accreditations. Or at this basic level, you'll see like a CEH, a Certified Ethical Hacker. And then as you move up, you'll actually start seeing more SANS and CompTIA with this work role in intermediate and advanced. Then you have your residential qualification. So right now, the focus has been on the foundation qualification. The focus is going to switch to residential, and there is more coming on that later in the presentation. And then there's an annual maintenance. So the thing about certifications is that's built in. We have to have that. So oftentimes, but everybody that's coded is required to do a minimum of 20 hours annually of some sort of continuous learning, continuing education. Oftentimes, if you've got a certification, those two work together, and you can use it for both of that. But you do have to figure out things like you're being here today. If we take up all the time, we'll get you that. I'll get you an hour CEU. So here's the current timeline of foundational and residential. Right now, February 15th is the deadline, so we've got about 2 weeks and about 3 days, maybe 2 days, for the folks that are in the cybersecurity workforce element. So there is a rollout schedule to this. The cybersecurity workforce element is first. That data is due from all of the components on how many people they have, and how are they coded, and where is your gap, basically. So you have to report to that. That's only for the foundation. Next year, February 15th, then it's the residential, and there is more to come out of DoD on what that's going to look like. So stay tuned to that cyber exchange, because you're going to start seeing the instruction on what is now the residential qualifications that have to be met for those work role codes. Then next year it is cyber IT, cyber effects, cyber intel, and cyber enablers for their foundation. And then 2027, they're going to be doing their residential. And then there is still a couple of workforce elements that I did not mention. And those ones, there's going to be more guidance coming out on those shortly as well, hopefully, with those deadlines as well. So more to come, but anticipate maybe it's going to be 2027 to 2028. Like they're going to do this in pieces as they're getting everything gathered and through all of that. So the things that we're hearing about what are the needs for upskilling. So now you're an individual, you've got to figure out, why are we doing this? We're looking for a wider variety of job roles. These are actually quotes that we've heard people in the DoD say, why they're doing this. We need to anticipate unexpected changes, track the indicators of achievement. So we really want tracking, like I said, if I haven't reiterated the data importance within this, that is what's going to make this successful, and systems are being put in place for that. But really, it's better tracking. You've got to see where your gaps are and be able to be agile as the landscape and the threat landscape changes. And that's really kind of the key for all of this. I'm reiterating again all about that data analytics, so the cyber workforce analytics for the entire force. So we're looking for hands-on practical instruction. So it's not just go take a test. They're looking for things that do hands-on. So some nuances to 8140. Everybody can be coded up to 3 work role codes. So a work role code does not equal a title. So I think that's something that you need to know. A work role code describes the work that you do, the knowledge you need to have, the skills and the abilities. If you can be coded up to 3, you'll have a primary one, secondary, tertiary. You don't have to have 3. And in fact, we'll be mentioning a little later, there's 2 sides to that story of do you want 3 or 2 or just 1? What's the pros and cons of that? And then training has to be approved. They're looking for multiple vendors. There is certifications and trainings coming. Certifications, internal training, all of that's in there. Tracking, data-driven. I feel like I'm just repeating myself at this point. These are some of the cool dashboards that are starting to get built out there. Thanks, Alfredo. So if you want to visualize the workforce, if you haven't seen this, this is kind of where people are kind of sitting in the different, how many people in some of the workforce elements, how many are authorized in positions. This is, I think there's probably better updated numbers from when I got these ones. I think it's a little bit higher than that now when we encompass the other work elements in there and the concentrations. But you can see, 8570 was, basically that one element of, that IT and didn't really encompass everything else. That's the end of my slide deck. I know we had one question. Is there questions for me? Brian has the good meat of it. I'm teeing you up here, Brian. Yeah, this is just the why. So if you don't have questions on the why, I'm going to let you do your magic here. And I'm going to limp on over.
So I'm going to go ahead and switch out the presentation right now. So I'm going to cover the implementation of 8140. So this is actually, you are the first audience to ever see these slides. I actually have been updating these slides even as of this morning. So you get to see something that nobody else has seen. Because we get a lot of questions of, hey, I want to implement 8140, but I'm a little bit confused. What do I do? What do I need to know? Things along those ends. So luckily, I've had Tara to help me out over here to make sure that I do the right thing. And I also have had, if you don't mind, I'm going to introduce you. So we have Matt Eisner. So Matt's actually with the 8140 office, with the CIO's office. So today he is my fact checker. So if I say anything incorrect, he's going to either pull me off the stage, or Matt is way too nice, so he'll probably just nicely tell me that I said something incorrectly. So, but the idea behind this is, hey, hopefully we can make this really simple for you. So we're going to provide a simple 2-3 step process for troops, civilians, and then also if you're a supervisor. Why 8140 is so important, how does it meet the mission, provide you multiple paths to compliance, right? The idea is let's not make this complicated. So let's figure out what the best path is for you. If you get stuck, how do you get help, right? So I'll be interested to hear afterwards what people thought of this presentation, and hopefully we've kind of made this very simple. So I'm going to start with the troops. The troops can also be civilians, but we're going to provide you a 2-step process to hopefully make this simple for you. So on your work role, okay, there's a whole bunch of work roles out there, and you would stand there and go, I have no idea what my work role is. It's actually sitting on your PD. It should be sitting on your PD. So on your position description, it is actually on the top of the page. And I'm going to show you a couple examples here in a little bit. It will have a 3-digit code. So it could be 452, 541, something along those lines. You want to look for that code. So a good example, so one that SANS would be very big on, would be a cyber defense forensics analyst. It's code 212. If it's a 4-digit, if it's a 2-digit, it's clearly not the work role. It's got to be 3 digits. Now, the reality is, and you heard Tara say this, you could be coded up to 3 work roles. If you are coded up to 3 work roles, you must meet the requirement for all 3. And who designates that? It's actually your supervisor. So when that PD was actually written, that's the time that they should have gone ahead and done it. Now, as Matt reminded me, there's no requirement that says you have to have 3 work roles. We expect most people only to have 1 work role. There's nothing that says there has to be 3 of them. It's just that they can go all the way up to 3. So if I'm an expert ninja and I do this and I do this and I do this, kind of like Tara, right? She pretty much runs CompTIA.
No,
so,
but I do have 3 work roles.
so sometimes I think both of us behind the scenes say we're the CEO all the way down to the janitor. So we'd be coded as the CEO, janitor, and somewhere in between. So to kind of give you an idea. So here's some examples that I actually pulled up from the Air Force. If you see it highlighted on here, you see on here code 332. It should be at the very top. So I'm going to hold off a little because I know some people are taking some pictures. Here's another example. I wasn't very good at circling this. I tried to make this look perfect. Clearly I did not succeed. But if you see on here, I'm on a Mac, so it's always a little bit wobbly. You see 3 codes in this case, 541, 141, 121. That means they have to meet all 3 of those work roles. So the next thing is you need to know what your proficiency level is. So probably in the past you've heard of the master, senior, host, things along those lines. We've now made it a little bit more basic because I know people outside the military don't necessarily understand those terms. So no different than basic, intermediate, advanced. So you would say, how do I know what my proficiency level is? I'll admit there's no perfect science to this, but it's normally tied to your GS level or your billets. So a good example, and this is just a basic guideline. So basic could be 5 through 8, GS level, 9 through 12 is intermediate, 13 plus is an advanced. However, I do have to emphasize, as Matt wanted to make sure, it is organizational dependent. So your supervisor designates that. So sometimes I always think of like a SOC analyst, which is considered a little bit sometimes more of a junior role versus say like a forensics analyst, right? But it's typically tied to your GS level, right? So if you don't know what your role is, your proficiency, what do you need to do to fix that? Do talk to your supervisor. If you don't have one on your PD, you do want to get that fixed right away. And we're going to let you know why of what the mission that Matt's doing that I think is actually great for all of us, right? As far as helping the cybersecurity industry out. So you do want to make sure they are finding cases where the PDs are not existing, where the work roles are not existing on the PDs. So we do have to fix that, right? So who designates coding when your PD is built? Who's doing it? Your supervisor. So nothing more complicated than that. So fact checker, how am I doing? Anything incorrect so far? Woo. So here's an example of all the work roles. You'll see on here 72. Since my Mac was a little bit cuckoo today, I couldn't get my kern, but we were going to have a little kern open up and let you know what the 73rd work role is. But it's actually code 341, Cyber Defense Capabilities Developer. So actually, that's something that CompTIA does really well. So if you see on here, it's kind of in the middle. If you see under here, under Intel, I just kind of wrote it in on the slide. But if you see on here, like for example, SANS does a lot of the, what I would call the cybersecurity intel. So control system security specialist is definitely incident responder, vulnerability assessment analyst. Those are all type of stuff that SANS covers very, very well. Cyber intelligence planner, that's kind of our world. And I know with CompTIA, they specially own the developer. SANS is all cybersecurity. That's all we do. And I always kind of feel like CompTIA kind of owns the developer marketplace, if that's fair to say. Tara's being kind. I would say they own the as I learned with the United Airlines individual, right? When you work for CompTIA, you're quite the star. So actually a little funny story with the United Airlines. He said, I want to remain in United Airlines in cybersecurity and I don't know what to do. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I actually know the CISO of United Airlines. And they actually have a program made for flight attendants and airline mechanics to be switched over into cybersecurity. And I know who heads up that program. So yesterday, I mean, it's always kind of fun. Like, I really enjoy my job. It was fun to be able to sit there and see the communication back and forth. And now he has a path where United Airlines, they're now talking to see if they can get him in that program and keep him with United. So that's when you...
Star now.
Huh?
I think you're the rock star now.
Well, one day, maybe 2 minutes, and then we'll see. He still said, he says, why don't you work for CompTIA? So step 2, now we know what our work role is. We now know what our proficiency is. What do we do? And you heard Tara talk about this a little bit. Go to the DoD Cyber Exchange. So if I had a chance to do it, I would amplify it. Go to the DoD Cyber Exchange. You can see the logo here right now. If you go on there, you'll actually see the link. You'll want to go to the WID, which is the Workforce Innovation Directive. They have another pull down that says 8140 qualification matrices. You want to pull that up, you want to look up your work role, and you want to see what your options are, right? And then take it from there. So ultimately, hopefully you have a certification, you have one of those requirements. One of the things that you're always hoping for is, maybe I'm already meeting the requirements today. Bonus, nothing more you need to do other than you have to keep it current. So if you have a certification, you want to make sure it's not expired. As Tara's shaking her head, I can't tell you how many people have approached me and said, I'm so excited, I meet the requirement and find out they were expired 5 years ago. And at that point, they have to start all over again. So, and something else that Tara noted, but I'm going to note, so I'm going to repeat some of the things that Tara said, just because we want to make sure you know it. There's new options being added all the time. Why are they keep adding new options? Well, for one, we keep adding new certifications to meet the marketplace. We're doing new things to kind of keep up. But also, DoD itself, right? The cybersecurity industry is a ever-changing industry. So there's always going to be new work roles. There's always going to be new things happening all the time, right? You know, AI has always kind of been in the background, but now it's the new buzz term, right? I always think of when I started, there was the biggest work role out there was a firewall analyst. Do you ever hear of a firewall analyst anymore? It hasn't existed now for, I think, 20 years plus. So the one thing is DoD, if it doesn't keep always changing, right, to meet the mission, and so that's good for all of us. So what are my options? And I know Tara's covered some of this. Certification. So think of us as like a skills validation. Same as like when you go to your doctor, when you hire a lawyer, even a driver's license. It's a validation that you have now proven yourself to be a doctor through an exam, right? Same with a lawyer, same with even just getting a driver's license, right? It means that you know the rules of the road. You know what a red light is, you know what a yellow light is, you know when you're supposed to stop. Things along those lines. And something that I think the certification industry is really trying hard, and I know both of us do, is we now have hands-on lab-based testing. So we've worked really, really hard to make sure it's not just A, B, C, D. You're now going in and actually doing exercises that are real world. And with that, we're always updating our certifications to always keep up with current. Now there is degree programs, right? Which is exciting because you can use your GI Bill, academia, if you always had a desire to get that. So some examples, CompTIA actually is usually a capstone for a lot of undergraduate programs, if I'm fair to say. SANS actually maintains the largest master's program in cybersecurity. Most people don't know that. Our master's program was built for people already in the industry, which is kind of what we're already known for. But actually, your pass grade is the certifications. So if you have certifications, you could be walking in that program already kind of fulfilled quite a bit of it. It is accredited, just like any others. Ours is actually through Middle States. To give you an idea, we're actually regionally accredited. And then I know CompTIA, all yours are regionally accredited also. Yeah.
Depends on the university.
Oh, okay. Depends on the university. Third option, training. A lot of this today is the military schoolhouses. You have over 100 military options that are out there. So how long should I take to meet the requirements for foundational? They are asking that within 9 months of assignment to that cyber work role that you have now met the requirement. So one of the big questions is, I've been a pen tester now for 20 years. I've always kept current. I know what I'm doing. Can work experience count? And the answer is yes. What you do need to do is pull up, and it sits on the DoD Cyber Exchange. You want to map, you want to pull up the KSATs, so knowledge, skills, abilities, tasks, and map that to your work experience. Who double checks this? It should be the supervisor of your organization. There is actually internal DoD processes that kind of serve as a kind of a fact check. Those aren't necessarily public sitting on the DoD exchange, but you do want to make sure that when you're working your supervisor, you get a copy of that, right? To make sure that you've now done it. There is already today a lot of people that are doing the work and they're keeping it current, right? That's what they're looking for. They want to see proof that you've done long-term competency of the work. And then, for example, if you've been a forensics analyst, you still are a forensics analyst. It wasn't that you did not become, you dropped being a forensics analyst, say, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So work experience, one thing I do have to emphasize, it's for DoD, military, and civilians only. So if you are a contractor, you do have to meet the other 3 requirements. So work experience can't count for contractors, only for DoD, military, and civilians only. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So here toward the end, hopefully I've kind of answered all of your questions and made it really easy. But if you see on here, here's some examples. So I pulled up CompTIA's first. So if you see, this is with the Security Plus, they're approved work roles. So you can kind of see some examples of the ones that they already do. So if you see, there's actually quite a bit of them, 20. And I'm sure that list of 20 is going to be 25 here very shortly anyway. So, but you can see they're all coded 3. So now I'm going to pull up some of the GIAC ones, which are done through SANS. So if you see on here, we have a security architect certification. So a lot of GIAC certifications are based on specific work roles. So you'll see some examples. Because that one's a little bit more specific, you'll see it has less roles, right? But clearly it covers security architect, enterprise architect, ones that that particular role fits into. Another one would be our GCTI, which is our cyber threat intelligence certification. Once again, if you see on here, it actually hits a lot of the Intel ones. That one was developed, if anybody's ever heard of, since that came up here, Rob M. Lee from Dracos is actually the author of that one, to kind of give you an idea. So just like Tara, I'm always going to push certification, but we really do believe in certification. Is it the solution for everybody all the time? No, we will admit to that. But there's a lot of great things that certification gives you, right? So when certification's actually built, we all have to meet that 17024 requirement. You would say, well, what does that do? And it's actually a requirement of certifications, not of cybersecurity. It makes sure that we are fair and equitable to everybody that takes the certification. It makes sure that there's no demographics that have been favoritized or vice versa, have been hurt by doing that. So both of our organizations are what's called our accreditation. It's not the only one, but we are what's considered ANAB accredited, which has now validated that we meet 1724. What that partly means is that our exams are legally defensible in the marketplace. So for example, the FBI sends their agents through us, so when they go in the courtroom, and the judge and jury asks, how do you have the experience to back this up? They say, I have the following GX certifications. We actually even were part of the Johnny Depp trial. Now, we weren't a big part of the Johnny Depp trial. Clearly, there was more exciting things than having a GX certification, but there was actually a forensics analyst that had multiple of our certifications. One thing that's interesting about certifications is people always think we just develop questions, release the product, and call it a day. It's actually like less than 20% of our work. Like, we have to make sure that those questions are valid, making sure that it's treating everybody equitable. We have to build job task analysis. We have to get that validated. We have SMEs. There's a huge process that's involved on every single certification. And then you have to update those certifications. So we, by practice, update at least once a year, sometimes multiple times a year. So why would you want to get a certification? It's a skills validation, is probably the simple one, to the cyber community. That can include DoD partners, such as other nations, like NATO and stuff along those lines. Certifications, if you decide to leave the military, are desired by contractors and also the corporate community, right? It now validates you into the community. It also means that you have a higher retention rate. So if you ever taken a training course and you walked out and you got really busy and there was only so much time to do, there's actually science that has built that if you take a training course, typically you retain about 10% of the material. We actually have whole blogs on it. Certification is actually at least a minimum of typically 70% that you have now retained. It also means you've retained that information longer. So it doesn't mean that you just left San Diego, now went to back home, and you already forgot all that material. So it does also validate that work role. So our certifications are actually built to have a particular job task analysis, right? That's something that really, so think of training in some ways, it validates the learning, certification validates the work role. Does that make sense? So training validates the learning, the certification validates the job task, the work role. One thing that's very true, and I know Tara said it, so I'm going to say it again probably 2 times. If you keep your certification current with the renewal, it makes sure that you're keeping current in the marketplace, but it also can meet the requirement for the residential that I'm going to talk about here a little bit later on. So you have to, with the residential, meet 20 CPEs. We typically give out more than 20 CPEs per year. But now, as long as you keep that current, you don't have to develop a whole other process. So you're keeping your certification current, and you're also meeting DoD requirements at the same time. So now I'm a supervisor, okay? So I now, hopefully that 2 process was really simple, right? Find out what your PD is, what's your work role, see if you meet the requirements. If you don't, you want to figure out a path of how to meet that. So supervisor, know your staff's job codes. You want to make sure to look those up. Once again, they're labeled at the top of the PDs, position descriptions. Army Marines have a MOS code, Military Occupational Specialty Code. So hopefully I said that correctly. If you don't know, you want to go to if you're a supervisor, you want to go to the program manager. It is always tied to budgets. So a program manager should have already designated, I need 10 of this role, this proficiency, 5 over here, 20 over there. Step 2, no different than the troops. Is your staff compliant? Do they meet the following requirements? Certifications, degrees, training, or work experience. They only have to meet one of those, right? And they only have to meet, if it meets that work role, if they have one of them, now they're covered. Now, step 3, I think, is really, really important. So when I met Matt, he had full hair, and he had lots of sleep. But today, one of his most difficult jobs, if I'm fair to say, so if you can really help Matt out, and we all really like Matt, so is to turn in your codes compliance to your program manager. And I'm going to let you know here shortly why that's good for all of us. That's not just good for Matt, that's good for everybody in this room. So where does it go from there? The program manager now turns that into the manpower manager, and ultimately it now ends up in Matt's office. And so there's some things that Matt's office is now doing with that that's going to really help us all out. So if you see on here, this is actually a DoD slide. We've already talked about all this, so I'm not going to cover this again. But I just always like, if you want to take a picture of this slide, here's your opportunity to kind of make this easy. All of this does sit on the DoD Cyber Exchange. So we keep hearing about this mysterious residential requirements. What is it? It's a demonstration of capability. The guidance is going to be coming out soon, so it's not quite here yet today. But what is that? So on the job requirements, work experience, assessments is going to be another option. Cyber ranges, which SANS loves, right? It loves, blue team versus red team, the Army's against the Navy, they're all sitting there in the cyber range. They can't wait to see who's going to win the cup and, attack each other. Those are kind of our world, so we love that stuff. One of them is CPE requirements for residential. So I'm going to repeat myself, I think for a third time. Certifications, you need to do 20 CPEs per year. But guess what? Voila, I got a certification. Already met the requirements. Nothing more you need to do. So as long as your certification's current, you've now met the CPE requirements. Whether it's SANS, GIAC, CompTIA, CISSP, any of the options that are out there, we can keep on going, like the CISA through ISACA is another good example. So I wanted to cover, why does 8140 matter? And it really is because it helps the mission, and it helps the mission for all of us. What they're doing with this information is it allows them for the very first time. As you can imagine, DoD is a very complicated machine. It allows you to evaluate the entire cyber landscape and all the threats. Why is that so important? Because it protects all of us. It protects the country, it protects the citizens, it protects our families, right? I don't know anybody who would be not for that philosophy, right? And what they're looking for, so what Matt team has, that's a very difficult process, they're trying to figure out what the gaps are in cyber talent. So what are they doing when they find those gaps in cyber talent? They're advocating for getting additional funds. They're looking to see what can be done to make sure that they're now meeting the mission, which protects the country, our citizens, and our families. So they're actually putting together a report. So when you submit your coding in, here in April is the first step. They're submitting a report to the House Armed Services Committee. Who is the House Armed Services Committee? They are the committee that designates funding for DoD. So they're making sure that cyber is always looked very, very carefully, right? So you want to say to your supervisor, I don't want to do this 8140, it doesn't matter to me. Why would it help? Getting you more personnel, getting you potentially more funds for training, skilling up your workers. Huge in our industry, right? Making sure that the right person has the right skills. They're looking at pay, benefits. Everybody wants to make a little bit more money, right? So that's what Matt's mission is trying to do. And we're trying to build the next generation of the workforce. All of those, I don't think any of us can disagree with. So this is our conclusion of this before we go into questions. And let's see, Tara, how are we doing on time-wise?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So our resources. So these are GIAC resources, but I'm going to talk about CompTIA's resources too. And then I'm going to go into Tara if you just want to talk a little bit about us. So if you go to the SANS GIAC resource site, we give you information of what you need to do. We have presentations and webinars. We're always updating that. We're getting ready to update here, in 2025. We have the links to the Cyber Exchange. It's a perfect example. All the links that are out there. We have the mapping to the SANS GIAC work roles. Here, I'm going to just take a swig. Okay. Here very shortly, we're actually going to be taking this implementation, we're going to send it off to a fancy marketing firm, and they're going to make it all look nice and slick, and they're going to create these cool videos out of it. So you're going to see that here very shortly, probably in the next, I would like to say month, probably it'll be more like 2 to 3 months. If you see on here, here's the SANS GIAC website. You will also see the CompTIA website. And Tara, I want to, because I know your site's really good. So Tara actually did a webinar a couple months ago that I was very, very jealous on because it was done so well through AFCEA. So there's a ton of resources that are out there.
Is the mic? I don't think this mic.
I don't think the mic's, do you want me to hand it to you? There you go.
She's like, oh, I'll turn your microphone on. Sorry. Just talk and, okay. I'm really bad, clearly, with this. I need to do more karaoke is what I heard. So CompTIA's website, we have a whole section, 8140. We do blog posts. We've done a bunch of webinars. We've talked. We just did a webinar. I mean, we did the one that you keep talking about. I went into a fog for that webinar, so everyone...
We always do.
Public speaking makes me a little anxious. So, but we did do one even in December with the lead over at with CMMC and kind of the over like 8140 and CMMC, because I know that that's everyone's kind of, so we've done a little bit of where do they overlap and all of that, even in and how to navigate across the two, or all of that stuff. So this is the link out to kind of that whole section, and then you can kind of go from there. And you will see, where is CompTIA mapped into the different quals matrices as well out there. And then my cards are up here. You have questions. This is kind of what I do and live and breathe, so happy to answer that. I know we're running out of time, which kudos to all of us for over talking. But we do want to make sure we address questions. So you got a...
So if you see on here, this is actually the DoD Cyber Exchange, if you want to do the QR code. Oh. So if you see on here, this is the QR code for the DoD Cyber Exchange. I'm going to post it up here for 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is actually both Tara and I's contact information. So I'm going to leave this up here. If you ever have any questions, I also have my business cards up here. Part of the goal is we thought that we were going to have a lot of time for questions. I think we still have time for a little bit of questions. Hopefully we've answered most of the items. Hopefully we've demystified some of the things of 8140. There is a mic back there if you have a question. So, and I am giving away free sans pens. So if you want to, it looks like we have our first questions.
So, name's Bryce. I'm from the Fleet Weather Center in Norfolk, Virginia. We've had some of our N6 people express interest in doing the GIAC certification, training pipelines and stuff like that. The hard part that we have, and you find this in a lot of times, is trying to explain to somebody, your leadership and everything else, your finance department, hey, it's going to cost me $8,000 to $10,000 to send somebody to a GIAC certification training, and then on top of that, I either got to send them to Texas or somebody, at a great distance. So then that cost continues to go up, and they're like, well, why can't you send them to a local certification boot camp training place and all that? Does the Navy or anything have, or is there some place that you can direct us to possibly where there's a contracting route or something that's in place that has more of a discounted?
Yeah. So actually that's a really good question. So he was asking with GIAC, is there routes to get better pricing than what just sits out there in the normal marketplace? So to answer that question, absolutely. We actually have multiple vehicles set up, even including Navy Cool. But based on where you're at, and what I could do is we could help you afterwards, because we do actually have some contracts with the Navy where the pricing is, I would say, significantly cheaper. Like when I mean a lot cheaper than what you see in the marketplace. Now, your second question was, hey, it's hard for me to send people to San Diego, Orlando, places like that. We actually do have virtual training. We also do broadcast from all of our locations. We do a hybrid. We also do just live sessions that are actually remote. We do those all the time. Actually, these days, more than 50% of the people that are taking our training are actually doing it remote. So it's actually more common that people are coming to our events. It used to be that people loved coming to our events and it was great for networking. Sadly, a lot of people's travel budgets have been just cut back quite a bit. What's interesting is our online training, for example, we've actually built the engine for that. So it has the same labs, it has the same, and we also have SMEs available. So for example, sometimes people, what they hate about online is they just feel like they're floating out there. So we actually have teaching hours. We actually have even little study groups based on the course and things like that to make sure to kind of add in that kind of, in person, so you're not floating out there. As interesting as it sounds is, if you take our online training, there's an assessment at the end of each section that actually tests you. Our pass rate is actually higher with online than it is in person because those assessments are almost forcing you to kind of think from a certification standpoint. So, I mean, the pass rate's not significantly higher, but it is across the board higher. So I don't know if that may be a little bit of a selling tool, but if I can get your information, I could put you in contact with our Navy person. Okay. So I thought he was gonna be here today, but I don't believe he is. So, but if not, yeah. Oh yes, so one thing, we actually give credits for attending this session, because we want to give you CPEs. I actually believe CompTIA does it. GAC doesn't do it so much, but you gotta scan. So make sure when you leave, you gotta scan, because then that way you don't get your CPEs. But beyond that, I was gonna say thank you so much. I love to hear how this first time presentation I did turned out. So if hopefully that kind of demystified everything. And I was gonna say thank you so much for attending.